Thanks, Marina. I'm excited to be here. So I'll just give a little quick overview of who I am. As Marina mentioned, I am a certified coach who comes from the world of nonprofit. Specifically, I actually trained to be a librarian and had a very short 8-month career as a librarian back in the late 90s. And then I, like many people, I think, fell into the fundraising sector as a prospect researcher, starting out at the University of Toronto. And then I spent about 10 years at KCI Ketchum Canada here in Toronto. And that was where the idea sort of sparked to me around coaching. We had a coach that we worked with who I really loved at KCI. And so about 9 years ago, I made the switch and certified through a coaching school called CTI, the Coaches Training Institute. And it's just really been a way for me to combine my two loves of, the nonprofit sector and working with leaders in that sector, and then also being able to step into being a coach and then do some facilitation with teams. So I was excited to be asked to join this this part of the CharityVillage webinar series where we get to talk about things that are a little bit more personal to us. And what I want to do is talk today about how we can use our values to really help us create more energy and success for ourselves at work. So what we're going to do today is we're going to explore what are values and how do they relate to our success. And then we're going to actually do together 4 exercises to help us start to uncover and articulate. I think what this will hopefully do is spark you, and then you can take some of these ideas and you can go away and think about them over the next couple of weeks. And I'd also invite you to consider whether you want to actually do this with your own team as well. And then we're going to have you quickly reflect upon, now that you know your values, how fully do you feel that you're living them in your life right now? And then by the end of the hour, I actually want you to commit to a very specific thing that you're going to do to put your values to work for you and help you create more success and energy. So I'll ask you to make sure as we're getting started that you have a piece of paper and a pen or your phone or something that you can use to jot down your values as we go into the exercises. And I will say that, this is an hour for you to have to yourself, to be present, have a little bit of time for reflection, which we don't often get in our day-to-day life, and then also to do the exercises. So take advantage of that. So why did I want to talk about values? Marina and I were kind of getting together, I think it was late last year, and sort of talking about, what we might focus on today. And the thing that I find about doing values work is that over the years with all the clients I've worked with, it's the foundation of where I start with them. And inevitably, whether it's a long engagement or a short engagement, I always find that they reflect back to me that that was really a moment in time that was very important to them, and it helps them to then know what choices that they want to make. So, I'm always surprised at how sometimes, I'll run into clients that I'll check in with them even years after we've worked together, and that's something that's still really resonating with them. So it's a personal passion of mine. It's something that also I find has really been an important part of living a life for me that is more aligned with who I am and more joyful. So I want you to just take a minute and remember back to what brought you into the nonprofit sector. Whether you're recently in the sector or you've been here for a long time, what was that little seed or spark that you felt when you sort of were first considering this career? And I think that for many of us, it's we have a desire to help people, or we want the world to be a better place, or there might be a certain cause that really had an impact on your life and you want to make a difference in that area. And ultimately, what it comes down to is we're all really in this profession that is about philanthropy. And as we know, the roots of that lie in love of humanity. So we have this very powerful overriding reason why we're pursuing our work, which is based on our love of other human beings. And yet there's complex issues that we're trying to solve. Some of you might be trying to save the environment, or, endangered animals. Other people are helping children who have, terrible medical needs. And so the issues are complex and require like really complicated wraparound solutions. For most of us, we work in organizations where there's more need, more pressure to raise more money. I always laugh at like it feels like everyone who's doing a campaign now, it's like the campaign ends one day and the next bigger campaign, starts literally the next day. We often work with limited resources. And another thing I see quite a lot as a coach is that we can be, I think, sometimes in the nonprofit sector, a little bit afraid of like dealing with conflict or, being really sort of candid with each other. And so there's a lot of these like unresolved conflicts in a lot of nonprofits that kind of start to eat away at us and get us down. And I was thinking about last month, I was lucky enough to be listening into Leanne's session that hopefully some of you heard, and if you didn't, it's on the CharityVillage website. But she was talking about the importance of self-care, and Marina shared that there was a record number of people, who signed up for that session, which I think really speaks to this sense that like we are feeling this sense of overwhelm and pressure and, not sure what to do with ourselves sometimes in the sector. And I thought Leanne shared, so many amazing ideas. And so what I really hope today is we can build on those ideas that she shared and start to realize that articulating and then really stepping into living our values is another way that we can reconnect ourselves to the love of what we do and to our purpose. So I think we would agree in the nonprofit sector that we really all understand and appreciate the power of stories. So as I was preparing for this, what I decided to do was I reached out to 7 people that I personally know who work in the nonprofit sector and who I feel like are people who know what they value, who very intentionally, set up their lives and their work to honor those values. And so I wanted to, throughout the webinar today, I want to start to share some of those stories. And I thought I'd start out with these 2 that I think are really inspiring for us. So the first one is the person shared with me, my desire for autonomy has led me to focus on a leadership style that aims to empower my team and to develop their own capacity for independent thinking and decision making. So this person, did their own work and figured out that for them, autonomy is a core value. And then they started to think, okay, I am in a leadership role. This person was somewhat new in the leadership role, at the time that we were working together. And so she decided that, if that's important to me, then that's the approach that I have to take as the new leader. And she says, I've seen significant growth in my team members, which I believe is in part due to this approach, and our revenue and retention rates have borne this out. So I just thought that's a great story of like really understanding who you are and what you can bring to a situation and playing to that strength that you have. And then somebody else shared with me, my values include curiosity and creativity. My role is in fundraising operations. You would think that my values and role are at odds, but no. So you can also see this person has a nice little sense of humor. She says, I fulfill my curiosity in discovering what the data is telling me about our donors, performance, and goals. And I get to be creative in how I present the story that the data is telling, crafting a narrative that helps the organization make data-driven decisions. So what I loved about this example, and I think is so inspiring, is that we might make up that someone who has a strong value around creativity would be drawn to a job like communications, or, maybe they're going to be a graphic designer, or, doing something like that in the nonprofit sector. And yet this person can see that they can really use their value and strength around creativity in an operational role, which may not be to other people the first value that they would assign to that person. But it doesn't matter, right? Because she can feel it within herself and really harness that and make that work for her. So some of you may be thinking, I'm not really sure if I know exactly, what we mean by core values. So we'll just take a pause here and just make sure we're on the same page. I think for a lot of people, they may be familiar with values more in the context of their organizational setting. So, for example, if you started a new organization, like you might have some kind of onboarding process, and maybe someone sharing with you, like, this is the mission and vision of the organization, and these are the core values that we hold to be true. Or your organization might have an annual retreat or offsite where where you sort of bring up the values and reconnect in with them as an organization. And so that's great. And what we're going to talk about today is actually more your own personal core values. And so some of you may have done some work in this area, which is great. And then this can be an opportunity to kind of check in with that. And then for other people, this might be very new to you. And so it's an opportunity to sort of get your juices flowing and start to think about what might be important to you. So the first thing I'll say is that values are simply principles that you hold to be of worth. And a way to kind of think about that in contrast would be values are not the same as morals. So whereas morals have like a sense of right and wrong, values are simply like, this is what is important to me. It's not about judging it or trying to figure out if it's right or wrong. It's simply what is. So you really want them to represent who you are in this moment and not who you would like to be or who you think you should be. So your values should not be aspirational. They should actually reflect who you currently are. And then the last thing is that we want them to be intangible. So they're not going to be something that we have or something that we do. And I find like a key kind of thing that people often say to me when I start to talk about values is, oh, I really value family. And that's the most important thing to me. And so we want to kind of mine into that a little bit and dig a little bit deeper and say, well, what is it? Like family is, a tangible thing. So what are the intangibles that for you make family so important? So it could be, love, it could be connection, it could be security. Another one that we can think about is money. Again, it's like for one person, having money can mean I have a sense of freedom. For another person, it might be like money is a way of showcasing that I'm achieving things, and achievement is important to me. And security can also be tied into money. So I'll share, just to kind of give some sense of what these might look like, I'll share a little bit about my own values and the work that I've done. So one of my values is joy, and that really for me, that's probably the one I think about the most and kind of the most overarching value that I hold. And it means that I want to be, pursuing things in my life that bring a sense of play and that feel there's sort of a sense of ease. I want to be paying attention to the moment that I'm in and really feeling gratitude and have laughter and all of those sort of things in my life. And then another one that I have is I was inspired. I love Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project, among other books, and she has a mantra which is "Be Gretchen." So I've I've co-opted that to be Janice. And for me, that's like reminding myself, like think about what I want in life and what's important to me and what I actually enjoy, and make sure I'm putting those things in my life. But it's also about being true to myself, and it's about stretching myself, because when I say that, it's like maybe being Janice means doing things that I didn't realize that I was going to want to do or be able to do. And so I have to kind of constantly be stretching myself and thinking about what that could be. So rather than limiting me, I find that's like a little bit more expansive. And so for me, for example, like I had thought about authenticity, and that sort of felt like it wasn't as expansive for me. So those are just a couple of examples of values that I hold to be true. And I think one thing that can be fun about doing our values is like we can pick whatever words or phrases or sort of metaphors that mean things to us. We don't have to be quite so literal about them. So ultimately what they do is they become a compass, and they help to point us to what it means to be true to ourselves. So I think that really taking like the time to reflect and making a commitment to know your values and to live your values, it really is ultimately one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves. So what I want to do is I'm going to take you through 4 exercises. This is where you can grab your pen and paper or your phone or whatever you want to do your notes on. And the first one is to simply think about like, what are the must-haves for me in life? So imagine that you have your basics covered. You do have, food and you do have shelter, but what else is it that you need to really feel like life is fulfilling? And just start to, jot things down. I would say that for some people it might be, life would not really be worth living if I didn't have adventure. So I need to be having new experiences or trying new foods or, going to new places. For somebody else, it might be accomplishment, so I want to make sure that I'm setting goals for myself and achieving them and, climbing up a ladder that I've set for myself. And for somebody else, it might be beauty. So, I think about like I have a friend who works in the art sector and she just can't imagine a world where you can't go and look at a beautiful painting. That would be just sort of a life that isn't really fulfilling for her if we didn't have art and people weren't creating things and she wasn't able to enjoy that. So I'll just give you a second to, just write down any of the words that come to you around that idea of like, what must I have for my life to really feel like it's fulfilling?
And as everyone's doing that, Janice, I'm going to jump in there and just say, feel free, anyone who wants to pop their some of their responses in the chat box. We may have time to just run through a couple of those. And Janice, I'm just going to let you know that the audio is nice and clear, but you're sounding a little soft. So if there's any way that you can speak up a little bit, that would be awesome.
Great. Thanks, Marina. All right, so let's do the next one we're going to do, and I'm going to invite you, if you want, to close your eyes while we do this. This is when we think about peak moments or peak experiences that we've had in life. So close your eyes or just lower your eyes a little bit if you want to. And I want you to think about at work, so think about yourself in your career and a moment when you really felt like you were fully engaged and you were doing something that felt like really rewarding to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be fun. Like it could be challenging, but like you feel like you're engaged, you're really like kind of leaning into it and it's feeling like it's rewarding. And once you have that, I want you to like notice where you are. Just kind of imagine yourself there and like what are the surroundings and who's with you. I mean, are you by yourself or are there other people with you and who are those people? And sort of notice like what are you seeing, what are you hearing, what is happening in the situation. And once you have a sense of that, I'll ask you to open your eyes again and again, just like take a few seconds to like start to write down any values that might be popping up for you. So I would, for me, one of if I think about peak experiences, sometimes I think about you know facilitating a workshop with people. So it's like I'm with my business partner and we're in a big room with lots of space and there's lots of people and we're sharing and building trust and people are sort of having like those aha moments. And so you know you can see how that kind of harkens back to my like values around impact and and joy, because I'm really happy and connection, which is another value that I hold. So you just want to sort of really like savor the experience and bring it to life for yourself. And I will say that some people love visualizing, and for some people, actually, including myself, it's a little bit more tricky. So if you don't get a lot out of this exercise, just trust that you get what you're supposed to get out of these exercises, and some of them will resonate more with some people than others. So we're going to move on to the third one, which sometimes people find surprisingly easier, which is the idea of like, what are the values that are being suppressed? And so this may seem a little strange in terms of thinking of your values, but I actually want you to think about like, what really makes you angry or frustrated or upset? Because often those things are, it happening, you're getting upset because something is happening that is really contrary to a high value that you hold. So that's why we think about it as a value that's being suppressed. So these aren't like the minor irritations of life. Like these are the things that you're really willing to like stand up and, take a stand for or against. And so I would think about for myself, like, as I mentioned, one of my values is having an impact. And years ago, I was sitting on this board, and during the first few years of the board, we had a lot of board meetings where we would talk about something that had to be decided for, for like what felt like hours to me. I'm sure it wasn't, but, very long meetings and, kind of going around and around a decision. And then we would finally make a decision and we would vote and, move forward. And then the next meeting, it would be brought up again. There were certain people who, sort of really had said they bought in, but they hadn't bought in. And so this whole issue would circle back. And, for me, I would notice myself like getting really frustrated, kind of almost like opting out, like not really sort of being engaged in the way that I should be as a board member. And so I can see now, like looking back on it, that it was like, I'm here because one of my values is wanting to have an impact. And so I felt like so frustrated by the sense that like we couldn't trust ourselves, we couldn't trust each other, and we couldn't move forward with things. So, and I think many of us, often in the nonprofit sector, like many people choose, to work somewhere simply because there's some injustice in the world, that they really feel strongly about. And so you can see how your values do show up in the choices that you make at work. And then the last thing we're going to do, and then we'll get Marina, I'll get you to share some examples after this one, is we're going to think about going back to this idea again that it's like we're all working in the sector that's related to philanthropy and this idea of love of humanity. And so what I think there's like a couple of different ways you can think about it. You could think about right now where you work and the mission of the organization you work at, and like ask yourself, like, what really makes me proud to work here? Like, what are the values that this organization showcases that really relate to who I am as a person? Or you can think about, what brought you to a career in the nonprofit sector. So either of those to kind of just you just want to kind of open your mind up and say like, yeah, like what is it about the work that I'm doing and how does that relate? And if you're, I think ideally if we're lucky, we can think about the values of our organization and realize that actually we align, quite well with those values within our own life. So now we're going to, hopefully you have a little bit of a list. And what I want to do is have you choose to circle like 3 or 4 or 5, like just a few, at the most 5, values that you really feel are part of your core. And so trust yourself. Like this is a little bit of an instinctual thing. I don't want you to overthink it, but you could imagine like if I tomorrow like had to show up in a new job, like what values would I want to take with me? Or if I suddenly had to go and travel to some unknown place, like what would I be packing, in my suitcase and taking with me in a metaphorical sense? So like it's just a way of kind of thinking about like what, even though maybe you wrote down 15 or 20 words, like what will you not compromise on? And then maybe we can get a few people to share examples, or if people have comments or questions, then they can share.
Great. So while everyone's working on that, Janice, we had some really good comments coming up from your first exercise there about identifying some of the values there. And we had things like humor,
Mm,
exploration, learning, personal growth. The outdoors and nature came up a few times. I know that's a
mhm,
bit more tangible, but
mhm.
yeah, that's a
Yeah,
big one as well. Hmm.
nice. Yeah. What would there exploration? Yeah, that's a cool word, isn't it?
It's a great word.
Exploration.
Yeah, it
I
really
like that.
covers a lot, doesn't it?
I wonder if anyone has a word that has come up for them that like might be a bit more obscure or, maybe other people wouldn't quite understand, but it can be fun to have core values sometimes are a little bit wacky.
Some interesting answers coming up as well from the suppressed values exercise that seem to resonate with people on the call today. So we have one participant who said trust came up for her on that list, feeling the need to be trusted, feeling insecure when that need isn't being met.
Yeah, I do find, I mean, it's interesting how I find that one often is the easiest for people. I think it's similar to sometimes like when someone asks you what you want, in a situation. It's almost like sometimes people will say to me, "Can I tell you what I don't want first?" Because sometimes it just seems like as human beings, it's kind of easier for us to think about. Like what I want is such a big question, but I kind of have a sense of what I don't want. So I think that's why this maybe the suppressed values works for us because it's like, oh yeah, everybody can tell you what makes them, a little bit um, over the top mad. Or, most people have had that. I don't drive, but I know people who drive experience that quite often, right?
Excellent. So was there more comments you wanted to run through, Janice, or do you want to give folks a little bit more time to be jotting
Yeah, so
things
I
down?
think what we'll do is we'll move on to, and there'll be some more chances to share later. But what I want you to do is just quickly, so if everyone, has their, 3, 4, or 5 that they've picked, I want you to quickly, and again, this is kind of an instinctual, don't overthink it kind of exercise, is just put a number between 1 and 10, where 1 would be like, I don't feel like I'm living that value at all. I'm not even thinking about that value. It's just really not present in my life. To 10 being like, yes, like every day I get up, I'm conscious of that value and, I'm making choices that are helping me to live that value. So just give each of your top ones a ranking between 1 and 10. And we won't ask you to share, that, but we'll ask you to just ultimately what I want you to do is pick one, put a little star or something or highlight it that you want to keep in the back of your mind for later because we're going to end with a commitment around one of our values. And you might choose one that you rank lower because you think, oh, I actually realized that, if the person who said exploration, if you realize like, yeah, exploration is really important to me, but right now in my life, like maybe I only feel like that's 3 or 4, then you might want to pick it. But you also might want to pick something that has a higher ranking because if it's a value that already like is kind of resonating and living with you, maybe you can make a commitment to use it in a different way. And we're going to talk about, how we can use our values to support ourselves in just a minute. So just trust your instinct. Like there's no right way or wrong way to do any of these exercises because it's about what is most important to you. So let's move on to talking a little bit about how then we can start to use them once we know what they are. And so I'll say that I'm going to give a couple of examples, and Marina was kind enough to also ask me to write an article. So there is an article in the Knowledge Center on the Charity Village website if people want to go and kind of dive into this a little bit more. And so I see really like 3 ways that we can use our values on a day-to-day basis. So one is like they can really motivate us to take action. The second one is they can help to quiet those, we all have at times like those negative voices that come up. And then also they just can help us to really have a more fulfilling life. So As an example for number one, if you think about, everyone probably has some things at work that they don't like doing as much. Like there's the task that you procrastinate on, or you feel a little bit demotivated, or you think, oh, I have to do that today and I'm not that excited about it. I'm going to make up an example. As a prospect researcher, I kind of saw this a lot, where there was sometimes the frontline fundraisers didn't love putting their call notes in the database, right? And sometimes they would pile up and people would be busy, and then it would feel completely like an overwhelming task, because it's like, oh my God, on Friday I have to, enter all of those call notes in the database. So if you think about a person, let's just imagine a person who has that, and they're procrastinating or not looking forward to that task, and they think about their values. So if we imagine that they have a really strong value around connection or relationships, then they can use that to motivate themselves, because it may feel like a more sort of tactical thing, to be entering those notes. But if you actually go, like, sort of imagine yourself going up a little bit higher and looking at it from a bigger perspective, you can think, well, you know, the the relationship between my organization and this donor is the foundation of, what is important to me as a person who values connection and relationships. And without this kind of tracking, there's a risk to that relationship, right? So you sort of trying to use your values to think about like something in a more holistic, bigger picture kind of a way, and then make it fun for yourself. Or like you could be a person who likes to have like more play in their life, right? So then you might say like, okay, I'm going to make a game out of this. Like I'm going to, see how fast I can do this, or I'm going to reward myself with a prize, if I can do this in half an hour or less. So just sort of think about who you are, and how you can do things to make it a little bit more fun. And then the second part about the negative voices. So the idea of negative voices, sometimes some people call them saboteur voices, sometimes they're called gremlin voices, but these are basically like the voices that we have in our head that make us doubt ourselves or tell us we can't do something, really are just actually, very kind of mean. It's almost like, we wouldn't talk to other people usually that way, but we sometimes let ourselves talk to ourselves that way. And they usually come up most loudly at times when people actually want to make a change. So if you want something to be different in your life, then suddenly those little doubters in your head get activated. So if we think about someone who's like, okay, there's a big promotion at work that's available, and I want to apply for it, then those negative voices might start to say to you like, oh, you're not actually qualified for that job. Like what the classic kind of saboteur voice would be like, who do you think you are? Or why do you think you can do that? Or it might convince you that like, oh, if you take a promotion, you're going to have to work more late hours or work on the weekends. You're not going to have time for your friends or your family, so you don't really want to do that, right? So sometimes it sounds very kind and loving and like it really cares for us, but really what it's doing is it's making us stuck in the status quo. So if you think about how to use your values in this situation, you might say like, okay, I really have a strong value around making a difference in the world, right? Like that's something that drives me. When I wake up in the morning, I really want to come in and do work that makes a difference. So if you start to reflect on it from that point of view, you might see that actually I can have more impact. I could be inspiring to other people on the team, and sort of spread myself out a little bit more to have a greater influence within this organization if I move up the ranks a little bit. So that sort of, suddenly makes this decision that might seem sort of scary or overwhelming give you a little bit more confidence, because you're doing it from a place of greater resonance and power. And then, the last one being that like we can really have, as I've talked about, like just a more fulfilling life. So for me, one of my values is I use the word space. It's kind of a bit of a funny word, but to me, it has many meanings. But one of them is kind of like literally like physically in my space. I like things to be very simple, and I like empty spaces, and in my calendar, I don't like to be like sort of overwhelmed with things to do. And so that can help me to realize that like part of the way that I'm going to have a fulfilling life is I have to say no to certain things, and that's often very hard for all of us, and me included. I've made some mistakes in the past where, I've put my hand up for something and then thought, oh no, like what did I do there? But so, it's important for me to kind of process things through that. Like, okay, am I going to really feel fulfilled in taking on this task? Or the times that I've found I've got myself in trouble is when I've sort of said yes to things because I like the person that's going to be involved, or I feel a bit flattered, that they've asked me to be involved or something like that, rather than it being something that, like, yeah, if I um, take away space in my calendar for that thing, is it going to be worth it for me? So I'll share a few stories to kind of bring this to life. So, in terms of feeling motivated to take action, one person shared with me that their values, which are connection and courage, reliability, creativity, and kindness, have really grounded me in discovering my unique value in my role. When I was considering a new role within my organization, I mapped it to my values and noticed it was even more closely aligned. I pursued it with energy and passion and landed it in one interview. So there's a perfect example of someone saying, like, yeah, like just knowing my values already is giving me energy and making me feel good about what I'm doing because I really feel like I'm in the right place and I'm doing something great. And then when a choice, emerged within her organization, she could literally use this as a roadmap and say, like, wow, if I did this, like, would I be able to use, connection and courage and reliability and creativity and kindness even more? And the answer for her was yes. And, I loved how she shared, like, she landed it in one interview in her passion, because you can feel in that, like, how if somebody showed up and they're like, oh my God, this is so aligned to, like what I want to be doing in the world and who I am, then that person is, is very attractive, in an interview. And then we also have somebody who shared one of my values is passion. The emotional connection to what I do is critical to my success. And today I can honestly say that I love what I do. I feel like I'm making a difference and I'm respected for the contributions I make. My values may look like 5 words on a post-it note to others, but to me, they are what keeps me motivated, ensures that I'm at my best every day. And so I think this one's fun, like especially the kind of comment about the post-it note, because that's what we really want from our values is we want to pick things that are like so personal and that like literally like when you say the word to yourself, there's kind of like this vibration and energy, and you can feel and hear what it means to you, and you really know what to do with it. And so, like I said, for me, it was interesting, like with the value around space, it took me years to even realize that it was a core value of mine, because it is so much a part of who I am. Like it's almost like so obvious that I couldn't see it. So I had done values work, probably like 9 years ago. And then it was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago with my own coach. I was going back through and sort of, and then, she helped me to see that that was there for me. So. And in terms of the negative voices, I'm going to share two stories, and that's me. So I'll share my own story in a second, with and why I have such wild hair in that picture. So the first one around quieting negative voices is somebody shared. I just think this is an amazing one. There's a secret permission that I've given myself as a charity sector person. No special events. I don't go to golf tournaments or gala dinners or walkathons, nothing. Once I started a family and increased my volunteer board activity, something had to give. And so I created a self permission, hard and fast rule: no events, no exceptions, and it saved my health, my marriage, and my soul. And so, what really I think I want to point out in this is that one of the ways that we can identify that something is a saboteur or a negative voice is when the word should comes up. Like that's often a kind of trigger if you're listening to other people or listening to yourself speak. And it would be very easy for this person to feel like as somebody who works in the nonprofit sector, that I should go to special events because, that's a big part of it. And then that person, literally made a very intentional choice to say that the way that they wanted to spend their volunteer time was being on boards, because for them that was going to be a way for them to have more impact, and they were going to be able to do both of those and also be, happy, healthy, and happily married, which is also very important to them. So I think that's a really great way that you can kind of say, like, whether it's an outside voice or an inside negative voice, anytime it's sort of like an expectation or should, just give yourself pause and say, well, is that really true? Is that the only way that I can see this? So, and then my own story. So that picture is me at the Carrick-a-Reid Rope Bridge, which is near Belfast in Northern Ireland, where my family lives, and that's my cousin actually in the background. And so this story began about probably a year before this picture was taken. I had been for quite a few years thinking about signing up for this 10-month leadership program that my coaching school runs and that I really wanted to do. But I had heard that there was a ropes course involved. And I would say that I had quite a paralyzing fear of heights. So I literally didn't really even know what a ropes course was. I just knew that I didn't want to go to one, and then whatever was going to happen there was not something that I was interested in. So it was kind of holding me back, to be honest. Like, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. And then I finally decided, okay, I'm going to go to this program and just, accept whatever is going to happen here. And I was successful during the program, with a really strong support from the other people and the leaders and a sense of purpose. I was able to go ziplining, among other things, and it was really incredible. And I called my husband the next day, and he couldn't believe it. So this is about a year later, and I'm on vacation with my husband. We're visiting my cousins, and they invited us to go to this rope bridge. And I still had all of the fears. I mean, sometimes I think when we overcome something, it goes away, but other times it's like, no, I just was able to do that in the moment because of the intention I had. And so I would say that I really tapped into this is me on the other side, having successfully done it, which is why I look so happy, because I'm actually glad to be alive. I tapped into this sense of wanting to show my husband what had happened to me, because he had heard about it but hadn't been a part of it. So I really wanted him to be a part of it. And I think for me, it's, and my husband actually always says that's his favorite picture of me. It's like the sheer joy, of knowing that I was scared and I didn't know if I could do it. And then actually putting myself out there, getting outside of my comfort zone and being able to have that sort of successful moment and share it with him. That really to me is an example of me living my joy value to the fullest. So that's why I'm sharing that picture that is not the most flattering picture of me ever with all of you. So, and then the last two stories, and then we'll get into commitment space, is that I want to share two people, and I actually really loved how these came in. They're two different people, and yet they both have a very similar alignment around being in service, which I think for so many of us, is the truth within the sector. So one person says, serving excellent peers is a life mission, and so I have networking meetings before work 3 to 5 times a week. It may seem generous, but it's how I live the value to serve and connect and help others succeed. But it also creates valuable connections for me and provides me with fresh landscape intel in my sector and community, and gives me tremendous energy and hope to start each day. And I just think, what a beautiful story. I mean, to think of somebody that's a huge commitment, to get yourself out of bed early every day and, start your day off and make your day extra long, with the sense of, just meeting with and connecting and offering to help. And this is a person who's offered me a lot of help. So I know he really has had a huge impact on my life. And I just, I think that it's what I love is when this person is so clear on their sense of what they value and what they want out of life, that they are able to do that with it seeming like a gift, whereas in many ways, somebody could step into that and it could seem a little bit burdensome, I think. And then the last story is someone very similar, who says, a main set of values for me is actively supporting the success of others and acting in genuine service of them and seeing the best in them. When others around you succeed, it lifts everyone up. It's so fulfilling to see someone go from, I don't believe I can do this, to, wow, I did it. And seeing others grow and flourish as a result of their hard work, but in some ways, your guidance and investment in them. So I just, I wanted to share those because I think it's, it's so, as I said at the beginning, like sometimes we just, we get caught up. We have so much to do every day. It feels like almost impossible and overwhelming to think that we're going to add anything else or do anything else in our life. And these are people that I know who are both very successful, have big jobs, and have families, and yet they're able to really kind of rise above that and say, yeah, but if this is important enough to me, then I'm going to do it. And I believe that sometimes when we do things beyond what we think we're capable of, it actually it takes time, but I think it really gives us a lot of energy. And I think sometimes we get too much caught up in time, and really we could spend more time thinking about how important energy is to us. So I'm going to share a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll open it up and ask you guys to share again a little bit with us as we end. But I do want to just wrap up by saying that I believe the power of our values are that, like, when we live in alignment with our values, we just like feel that things are right. Again, it's that idea, like, it is a compass. And when you choose a path, sometimes the path is really steep and sometimes the path is long and winding. But if you know that you're on the right path and you're living your values, then you do have this sense of, like, yeah, I'm just doing the right thing in life. And honoring our values is fulfilling, and sometimes it's really hard. If you are a person who's like so believes in something like authenticity, like, you might have to stand up sometime and go against what everyone else thinks should happen at work. You might feel this, like, discomfort that you don't fit in certain situations. And so I'm not trying to be here to say, like, it's all going to be sunshine and birds singing. Like, sometimes it really is going to be difficult, but in the long run, I think people find when they live their values that that they just are true to themselves and they do feel good about their decisions. And then we basically, like, we can start to harness our strengths. For me, kind of finally understanding this value around space, like, one of the things that it's allowed me to really step into as a strength is, like, the strength of inclusion. Because when I create space for myself and other people, it just, like, it allows things to kind of breathe. It allows people to create, like, feel a sense of trust and connectedness. And that when you kind of create, like, a little bit of quiet and emptiness and calm in a situation, then you can really have people step into their power and share their ideas. And so that's a way that I kind of use that and remember that as a strength. And so the big question I think that I would give you is to say, like, just constantly sort of be asking yourself, like, will this action move me closer to my values? You know, and we don't always know. I mean, it might not be clear, but I think it will often be clear if it's going to move you away from your values. And so what you just want to be paying attention to is, like, yeah, am I going in the right direction? And, is my path, as hard or long as it is, ultimately the one that I want to take? So what I'm going to ask you to do, and I really would love if, a few people can share, because I think, again, it's like hearing other people's stories sometimes really brings things to life for us and inspires us. And in sharing a value that you have and a commitment you're willing to make, you might spark something in somebody else that they also need that they didn't realize, right? So I'd love for, again, it's like if you have any comments or questions, but also if there's some people who would be willing to share one of their values that they picked and a really specific commitment that they're going to make around that. So something like, you might say, I've realized that I really value connection, and I have a coworker that I'm like, I just don't feel that connected to. So I'm literally going to invite that person out for coffee tomorrow and, get to know them and be like really open-hearted and curious and get to know them as a person. So something specific like that. So I'll get you, Marina, to share as they come in. And then in the meantime, I'll just put up, happy to have anyone, connect with me. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn at Janice Cunning. And if anyone wants to join, I'm part of a partnership with two other coaches, David and Sylvia at fundraisingleadership.org. And we have a free community that people can join, and we blog and we podcast and we write and talk about things like leadership and managing people and career transition and fundraising, but we do it all with a little bit of a coach-like spin on it.
It's great, Janice, and I can say there's some excellent articles over there on your site. So I do encourage people to go over and check that out, because there's lots of good resources there. I'm gonna just run through a few of these excellent comments that are coming in. So we have Lindsay has mentioned sustainability. I love the idea of making less of an impact on the planet, but it's been hard to work into my life. I think I need to research ways that I can live a more sustainable life, both at work and in my personal life.
Wow, that's inspiring.
Chelsea says, I realized I really value challenge. I feel the best when I am out of my comfort zone, learning and figuring things out. I will commit to stepping out of my comfort zone more often instead of staying in the day-to-day comfortableness. I think a lot of us can probably relate to that.
Yes, I feel inspired by, sometimes I do that, but I wish I liked it as much as Chelsea does. To push myself a little bit more to do it.
That's right. Here's another great one from Kelly. I value creating arts, crafts, writing, but I've gotten away from it because it doesn't have to do with my paying job. I am going to commit to making time to create because it gives me peace and joy. I like that.
And I think it's true too. Like, I think a value like that, like the impact of it can be like, who knows what it could do to your career, right? Like sometimes we get caught up in just doing the day to day, and like, who knows what's possible if you bring that back in.
That's for sure. Here's another good one from Tracy. Fun is a big value for me. I would like to see us having more fun as an organization. So during our weekly staff meeting, I would like to start sharing what everyone is looking forward to doing on the weekend.
Nice. I would say yes. Joy and fun to me are kind of synonymous. I'm totally on board with that. I can't work anywhere where people don't like fun.
And I think we'll end with this one from Katrina, because it's a wonderful note to end the comments on. Celebrating success. I believe in this, but I don't act on it enough. My own or my peers. I intend to reflect more on my success and to remind others to revel in their success. Too often at my work, we're on to the next thing and we forget to enjoy how far we've come.
Yeah. And I think, I love that. And I think partly just because it's actually fun and energizing. And I also think there's so much to learn. Like sometimes we pause when things don't go right to learn, but like there's so much that we can learn when we actually have success. Like what made that happen? Like who was I being in that moment? Like, did I do something different to create that big success? So I think that's amazing.
Wonderful. So we have a few moments to run through a few of the questions that have come in today. So I'd like to get started with the question about what you were talking about with getting rid of the shoulds. Do you have any examples of questions that people could ask themselves maybe to help that process?
Yeah, and actually I'll point to, there's a great free resource that the website is positiveintelligence.com, and it's an author and coach named Shirzad Shamin, I think he's like a Stanford lecturer. He's done a lot of research, but he has a free assessment where people can actually identify like what are their main saboteurs. So he has, I think there's 9 that he's identified, and I think sort of just, I would say start with that, because we have to know like what are our unique, like they range from kind of being a pleaser to to being hyper vigilant, like there are things like that. And then once we know what our unique sort of top 2 or 3 are, then we can really just start by noticing and then ask. I think the biggest question to ask yourself is like, is that really true? I mean, so often we convince ourselves that something is just the way it is, and it's like, wow, is that actually true? Or is there another way that I could, think about that? I would say that.
Excellent. And we had a lot of comments came in when we were talking about values, about good physical and mental health. And we had a question come up, sort of identifying that those might not be as intangible. Those might be a little bit more tangible things. So they might not entirely fit with what you were talking about values. So is there a way that you would articulate sort of that idea of the value of having good physical and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that comes up to me is like that often, good physical health, for example, and even mental health probably is like habits, that we form. And so I think our values can be a way to kind of lean into it. So if there is a good habit that you want to form, like you want to go out at lunch every day and go for like a 20-minute walk, then you can look at your values, whatever they are, and sort of say like, which value would actually make me more likely to do that, good habit that I need. Like that's usually how I use them with clients, is like if there's something they want to do, but for some reason they're stuck and they're not, then we'll say like, can you look at your values and choose one and ask yourself like, how could like amping that up support me? And sometimes it's also nice to have some kind of like physical reminder. So if, like, let's say you had a value that was like passion, like you might actually put on your phone like a picture of a heart that you see like every time you turn on your phone, or you might buy like a little beautiful little like object that's heart shaped and like put it on your desk at work. So having any kind of physical objects, or wearing, a beautiful bracelet or something to like remind yourself every time you see that, like, oh yeah, that's important to me and I need to get going on that, because it's easy to forget. That's the problem with all these things. It's just like, how do we keep it in our consciousness?
Absolutely, I love that idea of the physical reminders. That's a great way to stay tapped into the values. That's wonderful.
And sometimes, what I'll do is like I'll wear color. Like I think for a lot of people, color evokes, certain feelings. So if you like, let's say you have a meeting and you want to feel really powerful, like you might wear red, right? So like color can also be a way to create a feeling within ourselves that aligns with like what we want to bring out in ourselves in those situations.
Wonderful.
If you want to have more fun, wear some purple polka dots or something, and everyone will smile at you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, now this may fall a little bit more into career coaching and maybe a little bit outside the scope of today's session, but I'll throw it over to you, Janice, just to see what your thoughts are. Once you've got these values articulated, the next hard part is, finding an organization that maybe is the right fit for you. Now, do you suggest starting maybe with looking at the role and how the role fits with your values, or looking at how the organization's values fit with yours? And how do you go about starting to discover that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's a great question. Like one thing I do actually a lot of career transition coaching, and one thing once we do values is I'll have people, if they literally are like getting ready to, look for a new organization, I'll have them like first in networking and then later in interviews, like really craft stories that bring their values to life. So you want to think about like, okay, if these are the things that are most important to me, and they relate, I believe, to your strengths, right? Then you start to like think about like, what are the stories that I want to tell about myself, like whether I'm networking or in an interview, that are going to showcase my values. Because if you show up fully like expressing who you are and your values, then you're going to get hired by the place that wants what you have to offer. And if they don't like the kind of stories or examples that you're sharing with them, then it's not going to be a good fit. So I feel like that kind of practice of just like your value can seem kind of fuzzy to other people, but if you can have a friend or a coworker kind of help you practice, you can find ways that really you can showcase them and talk about yourself without, you don't necessarily have to say this is my value, but you're just trying to tell a story that really illustrates. Like if it's authenticity, then you tell a story where maybe you stood up for something, or you told the truth at work about something, right? So that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that authenticity part is really important of what you were saying there, Janice, in terms of, yeah, if you're very authentic about who you are in an interview, then it's probably going to be pretty clear whether or not those values align with
I always
what's
joke it's
happening.
like dating, you know, when we're
Mm-hmm.
dating, when we're younger, we're thinking like, do they like me? And then when we're older, we're like, who cares? Do I like them? You know? So when you go to the interview, be like, do I want to work here? You know?
That's wonderful. And that's certainly something we recommend to our clients that are job searching for sure. That's a very important piece. So I think we're going to end it there. Thank you, Janice. It's been such a great session. We're really happy to have you presenting for us today.
Thanks, Marina. Thanks everybody for taking the time out to to play with us on this I think very crucial topic.
Wonderful. So before we sign off today, I'm going to just remind all of you that we are going to follow up with you by email tomorrow with the webinar recording, especially if you want to go back and run through those exercises that Janice covered. I know we didn't have a lot of time today, so you might want to take a little bit more time to do those. We're also going to have a short survey in that email. We'll have a link to that. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill out, so I hope that you'll consider completing that for us if you can. You will have an opportunity there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session, and I do encourage you to fill out that question. We love to hear from our colleagues who are working in the trenches in the nonprofit sector. What do you want to see us cover in future webinars? And we will do our best to get those scheduled. We are going to be taking a break from our webinars for much of the summer, but don't worry, we're going to be back with a full lineup of free sessions for the latter half of the year. We actually have quite a few of these already posted on our website in case you want to get a head start with registering for them. And we're going to be kicking that off with a career session called Networking Without the Butterflies on August 23rd. So we'll have some information about that webinar in the email tomorrow in case you'd like to go ahead and sign up for that. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a fantastic summer. Bye-bye.